I'm Sue Pastor.
Ryan Verweiss.
Julie Bacon.
Steve Okers.
And this is What's in the Cup.
It's in the cup. Cheers. Whoa, I made mine too full. You want to get us started, Sue?
Welcome to our edition with Ryan Verweiss from Inner City Christian Federation.
Good job.
Hey, ICCF.
If you've watched our other videos, you'll see we all have some heart, a lot of heart for ICCF, and thank you for joining us. Just talking candidly about what's happening in our city, affordable housing, and all the issues. It's complex. We certainly can't tackle it in What's in the Cup. We could be here for hours, but you do a beautiful job with your organization. Talk to us about affordable housing, what's been happening, what's created this crisis, what's going on in our city.
Well, I'll try and do that in a very short but part of what's happened is with housing in the city, for many years the pattern was disinvestment from the core city. So people with money were moving out to the suburbs and building homes there. That pattern has really shifted, not just in Grand Rapids, but nationwide. Right? There's a real trend toward like, man, we want to live in the city where there's a lot of amenities and a lot of vibrancy. And as people, really the kids and grandkids of those folks who moved out to the suburbs are starting to say, I want to move into the city, that's creating some market challenges for folks who have lived in those the neighborhoods in the core city that suffered for many years from that disinvestment. So there's a real tension that's going on, as no one would argue, hey, let's keep investment out of the city. We really think investment is needed. We need to get rid of some of the lead that's in some of these houses.
Yeah.
We need to improve those homes. But how do we do that in a way that makes sure that we hit our aspiration as a community to be a place where people of all walks of life can have a home? And so really it's going to take some hard conversations. I appreciate you bringing this as a topic, because we got to talk about it. We got to figure out, how are we going to be who we aspire to be as all of these changes happen? Because the people who are on the margins, the economic margins, are experiencing displacement. As people think it's cool to live in the city,
Yes.
people who have limited means are often the first to have to leave.
So tell us, we were talking off camera about stories. Stories are impactful, and you hear these stories. You mentioned that there's 1,000 people, 1,000 families waiting for homes. Tell us a story, someone that was displaced that you were able to help.
Well, the story that comes to mind is Sarah, who was a single mom who had been working at a factory on the west side and living in a duplex there. And about a year ago, her landlord came to her and said, hey, I'm selling my place. You're welcome to stay, but the new rent is going to be about $400 more than you're paying now per month. She couldn't keep up with that. As a single mom, her income was just so tight, she was making it work. She ended up leaving and thinking that she'd find a place pretty quickly, but she couldn't find another place that was affordable. So she ended up in a hotel, spent through her whole savings, and ended up homeless. Eventually had spent through her savings and ended up in our shelter at Family Haven. We were able to walk with her and help her get a stable place to rent, but there are so many families like Sarah's out there that are in this difficult spot, who are, I mean, if you think about when your housing is a thing of stress, that impacts everything in your life, you know? So, and if it's something that's stable, it helps improve a lot of your life. And so it's stories like that of neighbors who are experiencing this stress around housing that really keeps us motivated to do whatever we can in a season like this, to have inclusive housing opportunities in our community.
I love success stories, but I know you're hearing the non-success stories all the time, right? Can you share sort of like what keeps you up at night, or what you're like, man, I'm sick of hearing this story. This is what's happening, and this needs to be solved. And you probably don't have the answer yet. You're praying about it and trying to figure it out. But what could the audience that's listening really hear and understand? Like, this is what's happening right now on the ground, and so that it's not sugar-coated, but that we know, like, you know, I don't know these things. I'm not involved in hearing these stories. We've talked about some of the disinvestment over years and discrimination, and you know, I look around us on this panel and we're not very diverse, right? So what is it that you're hearing that you're like, man, this is really hurting, I don't know how to solve it, but that people that aren't in your field need to know?
I think one of the key challenges is we have a collectively bad memory. Like, we don't know about our own history as it relates to housing. So investment today may feel like it has nothing to do with the patterns of investment in the 30s, 40s, and 50s. But that's a key part of our story that we collectively don't know. So if you're involved in investing in real estate, I can't encourage you enough to learn about those things like redlining, where historically the federal government was really steering investment away from neighborhoods where people of color were living. We have to have a collective memory so that we don't go back and repeat some of those sad parts of our history.
Is that happening still? I mean, the redlining, I think of in our industry, when someone says, tell me about that neighborhood, right? And we'll talk to Liz about that in a second.
Liz is like, I got something to say.
From fair housing, but we can't communicate on that because of fair housing, right? But the only communication we have is Google, and then they go to Trulia or they go to a website, and really quickly you can determine where lines are, right?
Yeah.
And so how do we balance that world of wanting information and consistently requiring information from buyers and sellers and renters, but yet trying to get rid of that past, which it seems like it's just as prevalent now as it was in the past?
I can't speak for everybody. I can speak for myself. As I've learned about my own implicit bias as it relates to particularly matters of race and discrimination.
Yeah.
I think we need to examine that and figure out where is that at play in me. Like, start with you. I can't tell everybody else what to do, but if you start with you and say, like, okay, why is it that I call a neighborhood a bad neighborhood? Or why is that neighborhood a less desirable neighborhood? And if we're really reflective, we have to check and see where we're perpetuating some of that narrative that's not true, that we've just kind of bought into because we never asked the question. So that gets to if we start asking questions of ourselves, if we start looking at our own biases and say, how can I change that? That will help you as a realtor to say, I want to make sure I'm not steering people one way or the other based on something I'm not even paying attention to, right?
Yep.
So, because I think that really is important for us it goes back to that collective history. Like, if I don't know that that's part of who I've become, how I'm running my business, it's hard for me not to perpetuate it if I'm not identifying it. So I think that's one thing. I don't know if that was from my question of what keeps me up.
I
I think
see
that's-
that because, I mean, even like when I was growing up and up until a few years ago, Grand Rapids Public Schools were in a tough place. That's not the case anymore.
I mean,
it's
I went to
like
the O.
super,
I mean,
yeah, I know. But I mean,
I think I turned out okay, but I'm still iffy.
Well, no, but now they're amazing. But not everybody knows about that, because you just keep thinking in the past. So, just an example.
Ryan, is there anything else that you'd like to, as we sort of wrap up our 3-part mini-series with you, that you'd like people to know about your organization, about Grand Rapids and fair housing that we haven't talked about?
I think ICCF generally is really excited about what's going on in our community. We have great opportunity to see investment come back, but we want to make sure that it's done with justice and inclusion. And so that's got to be a collective conversation. We've got to be intentional if we really aspire for that to be true of us. We're going to have to take some steps of self-sacrifice. Like, if you're willing to give up some of your profit for the sake of improving our community, do that. If you're willing to get involved with your hands and with your dollars, do that. And just educate yourself and learn. And so I believe that the future is bright for us as a community, but it will take us working together, working through some tough issues, but being intentional about making sure that we're as inclusive as possible economically, and that we can change the narrative as it relates to housing from what it has been to one that really reflects justice and a wholeness in our community that we all want for our neighbors.
Thank you so much for tuning in to this 3-part series. As if this is your 3rd time watching, great. If you missed the first 2, come back, and I'd highly suggest watching all of them. If you want to connect with Ryan, their website is iccf.org for their organization. And if you're starting to talk about housing for yourself, for your family, or just trying to figure this out after this conversation, feel free to hit up their organization. They'd love to invite you to one of their housing classes or educational opportunities to learn more about what's happening in fair housing and affordable housing around Grand Rapids. Thank you for joining us. We really appreciate it.
It's been so much fun.
Yeah, I'm Steve Oakers.
Julie Bacon.
Ryan Verwise.
Sue Pastor.
And this was What's in the Cup.
Cheers.
Cheers.